K-dramas have come a long way, but it's not just about better cameras or bigger budgets. It's about a complete shift in how stories are told. Over the last 75 years, K-drama storytelling has evolved with Korea's changing culture, tech, and global influence. Today, K-dramas are a global phenomenon. But how did we get here? Let's rewind back to the beginning. The year is 1965. South Korea just got its first TV broadcast, and let's just say it wasn't anything like what we see today. Back then, K-dramas were heavily influenced by stage plays and radio dramas. Imagine sitting in your living room, watching actors speak their lines as if they were performing on stage. Very less movement, and even less action. Everything was about dialogues.
어머니, 안녕하셨어요?
그래.
언니. 언니는 왜 안 나왔어? 언니, 무슨 어디 아픈가요?
집에 가면 다 알겠지.
In fact, these early dramas were more like radio plays that just happened to be on TV. The actors had to deliver their lines with such emotion because without the flashy camera work or dramatic soundtracks, it really all just came down to words. The audience was hooked not by the action, but by the performance itself. A simple scene of a mother telling her child to study hard could feel like an emotional roller coaster. The themes were rooted in the struggles of post-war Korea. They were more focused on family, survival, and patriotism. Think love stories set against the backdrop of a nation rebuilding itself. During this time, television was still a luxury for many people in Korea. So when a drama was on, families gathered around, and those few hours were precious. The themes resonated with the people because they reflected their everyday struggles. Characters were clear-cut archetypes: the devoted mother, the hardworking father, and the rebellious son. If you've seen any early drama, you've seen these familiar roles repeated over and over again. Apart from the storytelling, another major difference you'd notice in dramas of this era was the pacing. It was slow, really slow. These shows didn't rush through their plots. They took their time, letting each moment breathe. Sometimes, a little too much. But back then, retention wasn't a problem, so it worked just fine. Also, there wasn't much else to watch anyways. In fact, this slower pace was what gave the show its gravitas. Think of it like the tortoise and the hare. These dramas took their time to develop characters, and when something big happened, it really meant something. Every tear, every quiet glance had weight. Now, because the resources were also limited, the sets were pretty basic. A few props, a couple of chairs, and that's it. And the camera hardly ever moved, but even with minimal sets and slow-moving plots, these dramas had a unique charm. They resonated with people because they dealt with universal themes: the importance of family, resilience, and the struggles of everyday life. Even though it wasn't very glamorous, these stories were the backbone of early Korean television. So, the slow, dialogue-heavy K-dramas of the 50s and 60s weren't exactly heart-thumping. However, the 70s were all about melodrama. This is where things started to get juicy. Storytelling took a dramatic turn. Love triangles, tragic fates, and forbidden romances took center stage. Because who doesn't love a good love story, right? Suddenly, the audience was hooked on emotional roller coasters where love wasn't just a happy ending, it was a battle. And it wasn't just any battle. It was one of life and death, heartbreak and redemption. These stories weren't afraid to dive deep into human emotions, showing the sacrifices people would make for love, and the consequences of betrayal. Viewers were left on the edge of their seats, knowing that any moment a tragedy could unfold. But here's the twist. This wasn't just about melodrama for melodrama's sake. No. The rise of melodrama was heavily influenced by Korea's rich literary history and traditional folktales. Ever heard of the tragic Hongildong or the Tale of Chunyang? Yeah, they were the original tearjerkers. And K-dramas were just picking up where these stories left off. Korean folktales were filled with tragic heroes and heroines, characters who were wronged by society or fate, but fought back against all odds. The melodramas of the 70s and 80s followed that same blueprint, but they made it more personal. The suffering wasn't just happening to characters in a book, it was happening to people you could relate to. Your next-door neighbor, your own family members, You see, during this time, political storytelling was heavily censored, so K-dramas couldn't take on real-life struggles head-on, but they found a workaround: emotions. If you couldn't talk about politics, you talked about heartbreak, betrayal, and forbidden love. After all, who needs politics when you've got family feuds and tragic love stories to keep you entertained? At the same time, South Korea was undergoing rapid modernization. People were facing their own battles with tradition and change, and the melodramas mirrored this conflict, making them even more relatable. The family dramas started to become a reflection of the country's growing pains, as much as they were about love and loss. It was in this period that we saw the birth of the classic K-drama formula. Dramatic tension plus emotional depth equals a recipe for must-watch TV. K-dramas became a way to emotionally connect with viewers, making feeling the main selling point. And who didn't love to feel something back then? Maybe it was the fact that we were all stuck at home with nothing else to watch. And let's be real, those early melodramas were addictive. You'd watch one episode, and by the end, you were hooked. The music, the pacing, the dramatic reveals, they kept you coming back for more, like watching a car crash you couldn't look away from. You knew it was going to hurt, but you couldn't stop watching. This era gave us some of the most iconic K-drama titles, like Love and Truth, Earth, and The Flower That Never Wilts. You know, the ones where love is always a battlefield and the stakes are always sky high. So, the melodrama era was intense, but hold on to your tissues, because we've entered the most important chapter in K-drama history, the Hallyu Wave. And no, it's not just some catchy name for a cool trend. It's the tidal wave of Korean culture that took the world by storm, and K-dramas were right there, riding it. What began as a cultural shift within Korea became a global phenomenon that took over Asia, then Europe, and eventually the whole world. From 1997 onward, Korea's cultural exports, especially K-dramas, started reaching international markets in ways that hadn't been seen before. It all began in the early 2000s, when a wave of idol-driven dramas like Winter Sonata and Stairway to Heaven hit audiences like a tsunami. In fact, Winter Sonata was so popular that it sparked a tourism boom. Fans traveled to South Korea to visit the locations featured in the drama. That's the power of K-drama. These shows weren't just entertainment, they became cultural landmarks. Besides the obligatory tragic love stories, they came with a new level of style, which made these shows stand out. Suddenly, we weren't just getting the usual love triangles and tearful farewells. Oh no. Now, we had visually polished cinematography, sweeping shots, and a sense of style that made even rainstorms look chic. These dramas weren't just sad, they were gorgeous sad. You get the difference? But the real game changer came with shows like Boys Over Flowers and Coffee Prince. Suddenly, K-drama wasn't just for Korean audiences, it was everywhere, with a perfect blend of romance, tragedy, and a dash of the classic rich guy meets poor girl trope. But this era was more about reinvention than romance. Shows like Boys Over Flowers made the genre more relatable, more accessible to audiences who wanted something more than just heartache. They threw in humor, quirky characters, and lighthearted moments that balanced the dramatic tension. These shows were fun, and that was their secret. These shows made it mainstream, and suddenly the world couldn't get enough of them. Boys Over Flowers introduced us to the chaebol heir, the handsome, emotionally complex billionaire who falls for the spunky, relatable girl. Coffee Prince took us on a gender-bending twist of the classic romance stories. Talk about keeping it interesting. But the appeal wasn't just in the plot, it was in the personalities. The heroes weren't just rich and handsome, they had flaws. And the heroines weren't just sweet and innocent, they were tough, funny, and portrayed real emotions. These shows were OST-driven as well, where the OSTs were practically characters in themselves. The music in these shows was everywhere, turning heartbreak into literally an anthem. You know what we're talking about.
Every time I really wanted you, just how I feel that must have been for you. Do you understand? La.
The Hallyu Wave wasn't just about TV. Thanks to DVDs and streaming, K-dramas made their way to new audiences everywhere. Suddenly, you didn't have to be in Seoul to catch up on the latest heartbreaking series. You could watch them in your living room in the US, Europe, or even the Middle East. And guess what? People loved them. From My Name is Kim Sam-soon to Princess Hours, Jewel in the Palace, and Autumn in My Heart, this era was packed with classics. And they didn't just leave you crying, they left you wanting more and more and more. And that, my friends, is how the K-drama revolution took over the world. And trust us when we say, it's only the beginning. Now, you must be thinking, we've seen the melodrama, the rich guy poor girl love story, and the heartbreaks. What's left? But the era of 2010s really shook things up for the better. This was the era of experimentation, where K-dramas decided, you know what? Let's break the rules, throw in some fantasy, some science fiction, and a dash of everything else. And boy, did the audience respond. Remember Goblin? Who knew you could blend romance with fantasy and make it feel like the most epic love story ever? But Goblin didn't just feature romance. It brought mythology, fantasy, and deep emotions all together in a way that had never been done before. And how can we forget the ever-loved OST of Goblin? These dramas were bold in every sense. They weren't afraid to push the boundaries of what was considered normal. And then, of course, there was My Love from the Star. Aliens falling in love with humans. Yeah, it sounds weird, but it worked. Big time. It wasn't just romance and fantasy that took off. Crime, thriller, and legal dramas started to make their own splash. You know, shows like Vincenzo kept the audience on the edge of their seats all the time. Because we all agree that this was the most unpredictable and epic villain reveal of all time. And with shows like Sky Castle, the storylines weren't just about drama, they were about social commentary, with a critique of South Korean society and class. These dramas were clever, sharp, and unpredictable. And let's not forget the rise of webtoon adaptations. Itaewon Class became a massive hit, bringing the world of webtoons to life on screen. The beauty of Itaewon Class was that it wasn't just another coming-of-age story. It was about fighting the system, challenging the status quo, and doing what's right even when the odds are against you. The webtoon adaptation captured the rebellious spirit of the original and brought it to life on screen. Who knew that a gritty story about a young man fighting against the odds could make you root for a bunch of misfits in the coolest bar in Seoul? This era wasn't just about experimenting with genres. We saw a shift towards more female-driven and diverse narratives. Female characters weren't just sidekicks anymore, they were the leads, and their stories were complex, deep, and powerful. Suddenly, we had shows like Hotel Del Luna, where the lead character, played by IU, was a strong, flawed, and independent woman running a haunted hotel. No damsel in distress here. And let's not forget how the Hollywood-style production became the norm. They were full-blown cinematic experiences. Gorgeous cinematography, jaw-dropping special effects, and storylines that felt like they were lifted straight out of a blockbuster movie. This was also the time when streaming platforms like Netflix started changing the game. The way K-dramas were written and released was completely different. No more waiting week after week for the next episode. Now, you could binge an entire season in one sitting. And we did. We saw the rise of shows like W2 Worlds Apart, where the boundaries between reality and fantasy completely blurred. Or Flower of Evil, where crime, mystery, and drama collided, and you couldn't stop watching, even if you tried. The stories became faster-paced, more polished, and even more international. K-dramas were no longer confined to one genre, one formula, or even one audience. They were global, genre-bending, thrilling, and unpredictable. Let's come back to the present now. Today, K-dramas have officially broken all records. Yes, we're talking about Squid Game and how it hit every corner of the world when no one saw it coming. If you missed it, you're probably living under a rock.
지금부터 제가 하는 말 잘 들으세요. 이건 그냥 게임이 아닙니다. 게임을 하다 걸리면 죽습니다.
But it wasn't just the creepy doll that made Squid Game a global sensation. It was the way it completely tore language barriers. It was like the K-drama version of Avengers, but with more blood, sweat, and tears. But even before Squid Game, K-dramas had already broken out of Korea into Hollywood collaborations and international fan bases. Take Pachinko, for example. They did something totally new by blending history, family, and culture, but with multiple languages. You had Korean, Japanese, and English, all in one show. And while we're at it, let's not forget the wild success of shows like All of Us Are Dead. Zombies in a school setting. Yep, it's as crazy as it sounds and as awesome as it sounds too. And for the first time, K-dramas weren't just talking about Korea. They were talking about everyone. Because Korean series were never this diverse. It's not just the typical rich guy, poor girl anymore. We're seeing strong female characters like Yoon Ji-woo, played by Han So-hee, who successfully avenges her father's murder, and Woo Young-woo, a brilliant attorney with autism, played by Park Yoon-bi. This is the sort of diversity that was missing from the K-drama industry for the longest time. And then there's format. Remember the good old 16-episode rule? Yeah, it's changing quickly. It's refreshing to see K-dramas not dragging things out. Shows like The Glory have proven that sometimes less is more. You don't need 16 episodes to tell a killer story, just 8 episodes a season, but each one hit like a punch to the gut. Short, sweet, and oh so satisfying. So we are guessing this era is all about breaking rules. Dramas are faster paced, visually stunning, and packed with twists. The storytelling is slicker than ever. And let's be honest, streaming platforms have completely transformed the way we consume K-dramas. No more waiting week after week. The instant gratification of being able to binge watch an entire season makes K-dramas feel even more addictive. Since 2020, K-dramas have really taken their place on the world stage and will continue to do so given the increasing popularity.